Good morning. How's everybody doing? This is Sergio Jose with the Real Estate Hedgehog podcast. This is podcast number 23, and it's a great Monday morning for those of you in the future that are listening to this podcast. My partner Sam continues on his wonderful vacation. He sent me some really cool pictures of him in Maine, which is pretty crazy considering he and the family drove all the way to Maine, and he's having a great time. So for today's podcast, I have a very good buddy of mine that's going to be the guest host on the podcast, Jose Ceja. I've known Jose now for, I'm going to say since about 2006, 2007. And he too, like Sam, like myself, have been involved in real estate for a while. Jose, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, but I just want to let everybody know that you can tell the difference between Sam and I because he's the real estate Wolverine. He's got a beard, and I don't. And I wear glasses, and he doesn't. So anyways, I'm doing pretty good, Sergio.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Say, so like I said, Jose has been involved in real estate for a little while. Can you give us like just a minute or two of how you actually got started in real estate and, just real briefly so people know what your background is a little bit on that?
Well, I was 19 years old. My brother, now he retired. He was a realtor. And he saw I was going to spend my money on stupid stuff like most 19-year-olds do, car stereos, wheels, and whatever. So he said, I'm going to get your house. We're going to buy you a rental property so you could fix it up and you could own real estate. So he did it. He did his magic. He was actually able to get me a house with the owner, carrying a second and all sorts of, weird stuff. But at the end of the day, I was able to buy a property. I fixed it up, rented it out. And a few years later, I was able to take the equity, buy a second property, a third. And by the time I was 27, 28, I had about 8 properties. I lived in one. I was living in it rent-free, mortgage-free, because the other properties paid for me to live in one of them for free. And then, unfortunately, I got married and divorced in about 2000. And I had to sell, a lot of my properties just to, kind of make ends meet. And then about 10 years ago, I was finally out from under that rock, and I started buying real estate again and investing.
Excellent. So, quick question, buddy. So you're 19 years old. Okay, that kind of blows my mind a little bit because when I was 19 years old, I remember I was kind of still in college and making, I don't know, $2.75 an hour.
Right.
So how much money were you making at the time and how much money had you saved up for this property that you bought?
I was making $900 a month. I was going to school. I was paying, thankfully it was community college. So it was about $12 a semester. I kid you not, plus books. I used my brother's cars to go to school. I had no down payment. Like I said, my brother made it so that the seller would carry a second, and that was my down payment.
Nice.
And all sorts of other maneuvering to help me qualify with co-signers and such. And, I have 5 brothers, 3 sisters. I'm the youngest. So, I was able to, again, qualify for this, loan and this property and, just by the skin of my teeth. And I'll be honest with you, if, a light bulb had gone out at the property, I'd probably go under because I was month to month. But it was worth it because in the end, it was literally the foundation that allowed me to buy the next property, then the next one. And then once I was making a little more money and I got out of school, the next one and the next one. And again, I keep talking about getting divorced, but that really did, stop me for a good, 10, 12 years and set me back. But, like I said, the last 10 years, I've been able to get back on my feet. As a matter of fact, just about a week ago, closed on a duplex, in San Luis Obispo County. And you know what? Things are looking up.
Excellent. You know what? We may go back to that property at San Luis Obispo, but what I like about your story is, number one, you were so young when you got started, and that kind of takes the excuse away. Now, granted, you had a great support system, and sometimes if you don't have a great support system, you have to go out there and create it. Okay, got it. You just have to do what you have to do. But what I really like is how you were able to restart again. So for those people out there that for whatever reason, maybe started at one point and then had to stop, regardless of the circumstances, just know that you can always get started again. under the right conditions. How much did that first property cost? Do you remember?
Oh my God, I think it was $120,000.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so obviously very different from the prices of today, but then again, you weren't making the money that you make
No,
now back then, right?
no, no, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, it needed, one of the reasons it was priced that way, believe it or not, it was a low price, was because it needed a new roof. So
Oh,
guess
wow.
what? There I go down to, I think it was called National Lumber back then. There was no Home Depots. So I go to National Lumber, or I think it was in Downey, All American Home Center, and I go buy the shingles, the tacks, and I buy a hammer, and there I am. And it was really close to my parents' house. So people would see me on the roof with this hammer and this bag full of tacks. And there I am, putting another layer of roofing shingles on the house because I couldn't afford to remove the old shingles, dump them, and replace the roof the way it should have been done, right? So, but anyways, yeah, I just, I managed, I knew.
Did anybody try to hire you to put a roof on their place?
They would ask, but they saw how slow I was, and they never came back. Yeah.
So that's great. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to talk about, because of the fact that you started off the way you did, I want to talk about, at least for the first part of the podcast, about that first time buyer. How does a first time buyer, how is he or she able to get a property?
Well, the funniest thing for me is just, in the other podcast, Alfred talked about, analysis paralysis. And some people just spend so much time trying to figure out how they can't afford to buy a house that they don't. Oh, well, I got this bill, I got this. I'm going to school, I don't make enough money. I don't have a down payment. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that was me when I was 19. There was no reason I should have been buying a house. But instead of looking for excuses to not buy, I found reasons to buy. And when people buy that first property, they really, what they need to consider is the power of FHA, that first time home buyers loan that you can get, backed by the federal government. I in the newsletter, the Hedgehog newsletter, you talked about one of my family members that bought a $500,000 condo. And I was just so saddened to hear that my family member put down 20% on this $500,000 condo. And she's a first-time home buyer. All she had to do was put down 3.5%, about $20,000. And she could have held on to those other 80 for whatever emergency came up. Yes, her payment would be higher. Yes, she would have PMI. But in a couple of years, if the property appreciates, you get rid of the PMI, and now you have equity. So your payment's going to be the same. You might be able to refinance if interest rates come down. But I was just so disappointed that she didn't use the power of FHA to make that first home purchase like I did. That's how I was able to do it when I was 19.
So the property you said was $500,000. She put 20% down, so that means she put $100,000 down.
$100,000 plus costs and fees.
Right. So if you had gone FHA, I believe that's what, 3.5% down?
3.5.
So instead of putting out of pocket over $100,000, she may have been putting out of pocket, I don't know, what, maybe $15,000-$20,000, right?
About 20,000.
About 20,000, give or take. Exactly. So that means that she would have kept, right around 80,000 in her pocket, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and once you keep that money, I mean, think about it. Let's say instead of having a $1,000 mortgage, your mortgage is $1,500. Well, 80,000 divided by 500, that's 160, payments. You're going to be able to add those $500 to you. I mean, you just do the math, and eventually it balances itself out. You're going to make money, but to not use that FHA power to leverage, again, using other people's money to leverage that first home purchase, to me is just, not a good idea. You have to use it.
So obviously, knowing kind of how money works, knowing how real estate works can be very important. I know you were telling me a story about how actually you used real estate to buy a real nice truck. And I heard you say this when you first told me about it, and I didn't believe you, of course. And you
Right.
said, hey, Serge, and I didn't put any money out of pocket. And I'm going, what? I mean, in the big picture, you didn't put any money. Tell us that story, because I think that's a fabulous story about how people can use money and real estate to leverage even their lifestyle.
Well, again, this idea that people have, and I think it's been, perpetuated by the Dave Ramsey system of zero debt, right? It's great. If your dad gave you $100 million when you were born to not have any debt, that's awesome. But most people have to carry debt. Now, the thing is, what kind of debt do you have? That's the important part, right? So I was looking for a pickup truck, right? And I had just sold my old pickup truck. I had 20,000 that I sold my old pickup truck for. The one I was looking at was 35,000, a Chevy Silverado. So I was thinking, all right, you know what? Let me go down to the dealer. I got 20,000. I've got money in the bank. Let me just pay cash for this truck, and I'll drive it off the lot, and I won't have a payment, right? At the same time, my nephew, who also does real estate investment, he told me, hey, uncle, I've got this property over there in Imperial County, which is right along the Mexican border, Southern California, way south, right by the Mexican border. It's a manufactured home. They want to sell it for about $35,000, right? Now, if you're interested, there it is. So I bought this property for $35,000, which is the money I sold my pickup truck plus another 15. The rent from that property, $550 a month. At the same time, I got a letter from my credit union saying that they're offering 0.9% interest financing on new cars. Free money. It's a loan, but it's free money in my opinion. So anyways, I did the math. The loan payment for the truck was going to be about $550. So instead of paying cash for the truck, I paid cash for this rental. And then I used the rent to make the payment on the truck for the last 6 years. So I got a free truck out of it. Now I've got this rental property. I'm done paying for the truck. So now I get $550 a month in rent. And now that silly little manufactured home that I bought, rental property, is worth about $100,000. So minus my initial $35,000, now I've got $65,000 in equity, a truck, and $550 a month.
That's crazy.
So, again, if you want to go pay cash for a truck, have at it. If you want to go pay cash for a house and you have that kind of money, congratulations. But why would you pay cash for anything when you can use someone else's money to pay for that car, or even better, to pay for an investment like a property?
Right. Very, very true. And there was a question I had about that. How long ago was this?
Okay, this was about 7 years ago. So,
Okay.
The real estate market was still low. There was a lot of deals to be had. It was still somewhat of a buyer's market. And again, interest rates were coming down, especially on things like cars. So again, it all worked out. And it's funny because my nephew had bought another property very similar to it, and he got a hard money loan at 10%.
Wow.
Right. So some guy was going to make 10% off of $35,000, on this property. But again, it's just about understanding the way money works. And, one of the things you have to understand when you finance something, the bank is carrying a lot of that risk.
Right.
Okay. And I remember, going to some financial, seminar, and most of the time I don't really get much out of them. But this financial advisor, he said, if you buy a $1 million property and the bank finances, 80% of it, 800,000, and tomorrow an earthquake swallows up your house and the property is gone, you only lost 20%. The bank lost 80%, unless you want to keep paying on something that's not there. So when the bank, again, backed by the government, is willing to lend you in California, in LA County, you can buy up to 3 units, I believe, and FHA will cover $1.2 million at 3.5%. So you could leverage $1.2 million at 3.5%, or with a 3.5% down payment, right? So who's carrying all that risk? Not you, it's the bank. And that's what you pay for with the PMI and all that stuff. But again, it's a it's a great way to insure yourself against some catastrophic loss.
Right.
You know?
Now, to be clear, that would be for a first-time buyer FHA, right?
First time buyer, yeah, FHA. Yeah.
So you could leverage, if you're a first-time buyer, you could leverage up to that much for just 3.5%.
Yeah, in LA County. So, you know, yeah, it's a great, you know, again, and see, here's the thing. Like I noticed a lot of the videos here, and you know, you watch the news, and they always say, like, is it the right time to buy a house, or is it the wrong time? Interest rates are up, but home prices are coming down, and there's all this analysis. And like Alfred said, analysis paralysis.
Right.
If all you're doing is buying that first home, who cares? Who cares if instead of 500,000, you're overpaying $25,000, right? Or do you want to continue to pay $2,000 a month in rent, or 3,000 or 4,000, so that you could wait for the market to come down to 500? So now you spent $48,000 in rent, waiting for the price of the house to come down $25,000.
Yeah.
Again, if you're just buying that first time home, yeah, don't buy a $500,000 home for $1 million. Don't do that. You know, don't pay 30% interest on that, you know, home. But if you could get that house right now, if you've got the income and someone's willing to lend you the money and you could qualify for that loan, buy it. You know, what are you waiting for? You know, are you waiting for that property to come back down $10,000, $60,000? By the time it does, which, you know, rarely happens, you're probably going to already be, you know, whatever, paying another $50,000 in rent, and you'll have nothing.
Right. So true. And you know what? Even so, so we're talking about the first-time home buyer becoming educated, hopefully having a little bit of savvy as far as how money works. And there are certainly ways to take advantage of that in a very legal way that really gives you an advantage over other ways of making money. I know Sam and I have been talking a lot about on the next investment property. So right now we were talking about that first property that someone's going to buy that probably will live in, maybe rent, but most likely live in. But I want to just take it just the next step up, which is buying that investment property that may be, you know, commercial property, which is 5 units or more. And now you're jumping in price from, you know, especially if it's going to be, let's say, a 10 or 12 or 20 unit property, maybe 5, 6, 700,000 for the single family. Now you're jumping up to 1.5, 1.7, $2 million, depending on where you're buying it. Certainly here in Southern California, those are easy numbers to, you know, run against. But regardless, one of the things that we've been talking about is going with an interest-only loan. Okay. And the reason for that is because let me give you an example. Let's just say that if you had, let's say, a loan, whatever the loan amount would be, and part of your payment, $1,000 of that payment was paying down your principal.
Right.
Okay. And then the rest of it is going to interest. Well, if you get a loan that's interest only, that $1,000 is actually staying in your pocket. You are collecting your pay down up front, which is something that Sam and I have been thinking a lot about and going, wow, kind of like you were talking earlier about keeping that money in your pocket, you know, instead of putting, you know, $100,000 down, putting $30,000 down or whatever the amount was. Same thing with this type of interest only. Instead of paying down the mortgage, have that money stay in your pocket to be able to allocate it to something else. Again, making even more money as you finance another property.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about interest-only loans, you know, and I'll use my parents' house as an example. They bought their home back in 1972, and I think they paid $12,000 for it, right? Let's say they had gotten and by the way, my mom is one of those people that, oh, I had to pay cash for it. And she did, you know, back then in 1971, 72, right? 30 years later, the properties there in that same neighborhood were selling for about, I want to say about 250, 300,000,
Wow.
right? Okay. So had she gotten an interest-only loan, she would have paid off the entire property, right? And at the end, she would have to balloon payment $12,000, which she could have easily done by refinancing the property and pulling $12,000. Who wouldn't lend her $12,000 on a $300,000 property. So
Right.
again, you know, a lot of times when people think, oh, interest only, I'm never going to pay down the principal. That's okay, because in 30 years, that $12,000 principal, you know, you could sell your car and pay off the $12,000 principal.
Right.
So again, it's just about your situation, how you get. But once you're going from that first property into investment property, then it's a whole different set of rules, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because now you do have to worry about market forces and do a little more analysis to make sure you're getting a good deal and the cash flows there. Earlier we were talking, I love analogies. You know, if I'm building a little patio out in the backyard and I'm going to need, you know, 20 pieces of 2x4, do I care about the price of lumber? No. But if I'm going to go build a, you know, 1,000 unit, you know, whatever development, I care about the price of lumber. Yeah. So when you're buying that first home, you shouldn't really be too concerned about the big picture of the economy, because it really doesn't matter to you, because you're going to be paying rent versus paying a mortgage. So that's a big chunk of your mortgage, what you would have been paying in rent. But now that you're going to buy an investment property, you really have to start looking again, what is the price of lumber? You know, because now you need the big picture. What are the interest rates? You know, what are the rents going for? You know, how much is it going to cost me to maintain this property? All these different costs. Now you really do have to look at them. Do I want an interest-only loan so I could increase my cash flow, right? Or am I more interested in paying down, you know, this property so I could build equity and maybe buy a third property? Mm-hmm. So again, it just depends on what you're doing. But that second property, you really do have to do a little more analysis, but not too much, because you don't want to sit on your hands and, you know, wait for opportunities. Look, when I was going to school, my economics professor gave us a bunch of great advice. And one of the things he said, there's only two ways to invest. It's either the end of the world or it's not.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay. He said, you know, and what he used as an example was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He said, after the 2 A-bombs were dropped on these cities, people walked back to their homes, or where their homes used to be, their businesses, and they saw it was the end of the world, and they walked away. They left their businesses, they left their property, their homes. They said, this is the end of the world. What is in Nagasaki and Hiroshima today? What exists there? A thriving city. It all came back. It wasn't the end of the world. It came back. So if you think there's going to be a tomorrow, invest. Don't sit on your hands. Don't wait for the perfect moment, or, oh my God, oh Lord. About 3 years ago, I thought it was going to be the end of the world with the whole COVID pandemic. I even told one of my friends, it's probably not a good idea to buy property right now. And I was wrong. And that friend was Sergio. Because guess what? About 8 months into it, what I saw was, hey, it's not the end of the world. Prices are going up. And I was just floored, because, you know, like the people at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, you know, I was taken aback, you know, 100,000 people dead, 200,000 people dead. I thought, there's no way, you know, this is going to be sustainable, this economy. But it was, and it grew. So about 8 months into it, I decided, you know what, I'm going to invest. And I bought a 4-unit property. And about a year or two later, a year and a half later, it's gone up in value 20%.
Yeah.
Had I decided it was the end of the world, I would have just held on to my cash, watched it depreciate at the rate of inflation, which is 8.5%, instead of making 20% using someone else's money. So just like my econ professor said, you either invest for the end of the world or for a tomorrow. So I guess I'm an optimist. I'm investing for tomorrow. I don't care that gas is $7 a gallon. I don't care that inflation is 8.5%. So long as I can make that investment and pay the bills, I'm going to keep making them, because I really don't think it's the end of the world.
Excellent. No, and I remember when you told me that, I think I was telling you that I was going to buy a property up in Boise, right? And you were telling me I was nuts, I was crazy, the market was a crater. And I mean, I bought it anyways, not because I was like really real estate savvy or could predict the future, but more probably because I was just too dumb to not, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it worked out. Yeah, and you're right. Because, I mean, everybody has a different view of how life is, how things are going to progress. But you're absolutely right. Once you realize, hey, you know what, we're going to get through this COVID thing. You just said, hey, you know what, I'm going to pivot and now go and make my decisions based on the fact that there will be a tomorrow. And obviously, you've done very well with that. So, Jose, great conversation, my man. We're going to bring it to a close right now. Any last bit of advice or just a word or anything you'd like to give to anybody that may be listening to this podcast?
Well, if you think it's the end of the world, sell everything you got and let's go to Vegas.
Okay,
right?
let's go
But
party.
if you don't, yeah, but if you don't, I suggest if you're a first-time home buyer, use that FHA. If you're going to make that next investment, then look at the big picture and do a little more thinking. But that first house, just remember this: you could either keep paying rent for the next 30 years, or you could go buy a house and don't worry about overpaying 5%, 10%. Don't worry about the interest rate. Just get in the market, and eventually you're going to see it'll be a world of good for you.
Yeah, and you know what? Great piece of advice. I know right now people are thinking that the real estate market's going to go down, maybe even crash. And if it does, to me, just more buying opportunities. I don't really think it's going to happen. But that just means more buying opportunities.
Well, let me just say this: if it's your first home, the real estate market crash, you still need a place to live, right?
Yeah.
So you could either be paying rent or be paying the mortgage and wait for it to come back up.
Exactly. Very good. So for if you guys are interested in getting our newsletter that Jose referenced, the Real Estate Hedgehog newsletter, send us an email to realestatehedgehog at gmail.com. That's realestatehedgehog@gmail.com. Check out our website at hedgehogcapitalinvestments.com. That's hedgehogcapitalinvestments.com. Thank you, Jose, again so much for being here. I think we're going to have you back because you had some real good stuff to say, and I look forward to having Sam also. But I'm going to tell Sam, don't go on vacation, bro. Someone's going to take your place. I'm telling you.
No one can replace the Wolverine.
The Wolverine, no, he is sharp, man. I love that guy. He is super sharp. Again, Jose, thank you very much. Take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.